Bam.
This is Marc Cameron, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Yeah, this is fun. We get to do these sort of we get to do these fun shows where authors come on and we talk about stuff like first off, Marc is a former retired federal agent. I'm a former federal agent, totally different lanes than what we did, but now we do different stuff. And I just always get a kick, Marc, out of being able to kind of swap notes, because we see the world through our own specific lens, and you try to create, when you're out there working and it sucks, you're trying to create something and you're like, oh, and you have all these moments, like for me, like walking through the mud in Bosnia and just getting mud on every single thing. And you just cannot stay clean. And you're like, I just put this clean uniform on. And like I got to go sit in some farmer's house and I'm covered in mud. It's just like it's all ridiculous. And so these are the things that go into the storybook, and so that's just one of my versions of what we do. But I just love talking to folks like us who have done, you're a U.S. Marshals, I'm Army CI, whatever, a million miles apart professionally, but still in a stack of things that are all sort of kin. So what are some of the things that you have brought to your writing? I mean, super successful already, but that sucked in the time that you were doing it. You're like, I cannot forget this moment because this is going to go into a story one day.
Oh, yeah, that's a great observation. I'm anybody that's read my books for very long knows I started writing Westerns. And so I just anything to do with horses and the cowboy mystique and stuff like that. And I was a mounted police officer before in Texas. So just being, in touch with the horses and being on them so many hours a day and the good men and women that I worked with. And then I moved to Alaska, got more into riding motorcycles again. And I remember at one point, so I wrote a series about a character named Jericho Quinn, who was an Air Force OSI agent. I mentioned that my son did that for a number of years. And he rides motorcycles. He rides BMW GS motorcycle. And I remember I was riding down the Alaska Highway. I've done it 7 times, one way or another, on motorcycles and in cars. And I was riding down by myself on my Beamer, and a motorhome pulled out in front of me in the middle of the Yukon Territory. There was nobody but us. He was pulled over on the side of the road. He looked back, looked to me like he waved me forward, but he never even saw me. He was I think he was having a fight with his wife, and pulled right out in front of me. I laid down the bike, flipped down into the gravel and down in a little ditch. The bike on both the panniers fell off, popped off. But I remember and I wasn't going very fast because I'm passing the only motorhome. And I remember sliding on my back down the gravel on the Alaska Highway in the Yukon Territory, thinking this is going to go in a book. This absolutely is going to be a perfect thing in a book. So yeah, lots of stuff like that. I think that's what I always say, that writers are like mollusks. We're really kind of filtering the world for all the little tidbits around us.
Yeah.
And sounds like you think the same way.
Absolutely. Just in general, in my world, even within my field, it's so varied. Like your son's version of counterintelligence could be completely different than mine. Within the Army world, there's 100 sub-disciplines you can do, and you aren't going to touch but maybe 10 of them in your career. And so like the names, and like you can kind of speak the language, but if you had a peer show up and they did things and you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And that's within my community. Now you show up to some command and they're like, who are you? What are you going to do? That's not what I want you to do. And you're like, listen, this is what I do. This is how I do it. It's hard to do that. And so when I think about like one of the biggest challenges on the counterintelligence side is just being allowed to do the job in the way that you think, if you have the experience to say so, to help the command in the way that works best for what's there and what you can do. And a lot of times they just don't know. They have no idea where to put you in their structures so that you can be optimized. And so they're like, why don't you do this thing? And you're like, no, that's not what I do. And so these kind of things go into like when I talk about how hard it is to be this type of a spy, it's very hard to explain to people. Like I'm way more in peril day to day on the camp, where the fellow Americans are like, who are you? What are you doing? How are you trying to get me? And I'm like, I'm on your side. I do bring a lot
Mm.
of bad news, but I'm on your side. You know, and these are the things where, you know, a contentious boss or a person who's like hardline and the CI people, we're in the gray zone all the time. The rules often don't apply to us because we do a thing that's the rules just don't work well for, you know, and
Mhm.
so all of this feeds stories.
Right, absolutely. It's a people business. You're watching people, whether it's managing up or out in the field or assets or bad guys or, you know, whatever. It's a people business.
Yeah.
So is writing.
Yeah. Yeah. It is people business. I suppose we have to at least touch on some of the events from the assassination this past weekend. I don't want to get into the political part of it, but
Sure.
you know, the operational side of things. You and I both understand the operational chaos that can happen from something. You got multiple jurisdictions all trying to work in the same area. You know, and as much as you practice and rehearse, there's never enough time for all these things. So, do you have any basic thoughts? Like, if you were going to write this as a novelist, that pulls all of the reality out of it. You know, how do you approach this whole thing? Is that a scenario that you would even try to write where something like this happens? It seems to me very plausible, but you're the novelist.
No, it's absolutely plausible. And you know, real time, I really I refrain from giving, you know, Monday morning. In my head, I do. And my son,
Yeah,
my youngest son, not the OSI one, but my youngest son was the counter sniper with the police department here in Anchorage for a number of years, and he's moved on to work for the feds now, but not the Secret Service, but with another branch. Um, and he and I have talked about it quite a bit because he's been many times in the same position that those counter snipers that the state and locals found themselves in Pennsylvania. And so we chatted back and forth. The thing is that you mentioned the word chaos, and that's exactly, there are a lot of things that need to be explained, and I hope they will be explained, time
sure.
lags
Right.
and that sort of thing. But I actually wrote a scene in I think it was the third to the last Clancy that I did, a book called Chain of Command, where there's an assassination attempt on actually a kidnapping of the first lady. And I have lots of friends in the Secret Service. I know because we integrate periodically in the Marshal Service, we don't get near the protective training that the Secret Service does, but we get a lot of protective training because of the Supreme Court justices and the district court judges and that sort of thing that we do protect, and also protected witnesses. So we get a good deal of dignitary protection and personal protection training. And so I know basic standard operating procedures and means and method and that sort of thing. So as a novelist, I'm very careful not to give away, you know, key details like how
Hmm.
drones are handled and things like that. You could probably find that stuff on YouTube right now with some other
Sure.
talking head that gives it all away. I just don't want to be the guy to do that. You're going to have to work harder than to read one of my novels to get the keys on how to build a nuclear bomb or whatever.
Right.
At the same time, I'm very, you know, it hurt my heart to have federal agents killed in the blast and whatever in my book. But it is possible. And you work these, sometimes it becomes possible because the person's willing to give up their life, the perpetrator. And that's, you know, it's very difficult to protect a dignitary, even the president of the United States, if the person doesn't want to come out alive. So there's a lot of ifs and what ifs and conspiracies and all of that right now, but it definitely makes, sadly, good fodder for what ifs, and that's what writers do, right? I mean, we look at
Yeah.
world events, and in the Clancy's, for instance, and even in my Jericho Quinn's or the books I write now, the Arliss Cutter series, I look at, okay, here's what's going on now. What if it went this direction? Let me write a story about that rather than
Yeah.
just mirror daily news. That would be boring. There's plenty of stuff on daily news, plenty of excitement you can get from daily news, and let's make up a story reminiscent of it, not an exact retelling.
Yeah, you said a lot there, and one of the things that we just hate, you know, in the big world today is, you know, give all of the different investigating jurisdictions time to look into this thing. and sort it out. Like we've passed the event. We don't know what happened yet. We can all speculate, but let the professionals do it. Now, we may not trust the outcome, and we may not trust accountability to come from it, but that's a different thing than letting that whoever it's going to be, that lieutenant, that colonel, that police captain, whoever it's going to be, who goes and says, let's find out where we broke this thing. And they go through and they do it. And quite often it is a couple of silly things that happen. We also have to keep in mind that in most Secret Service careers, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, most careers in your field, when you guys are doing protective services, most everybody, we don't ever have an event like this. I mean, there's millions and millions of shifts where nothing happens. And so a lot of our training is, and I'm speaking of the military side, it is to a standard of familiarity, or here are the basics of what you do. Be prepared for change on the fly, but that's really where we're at, because we can't spend every day. We might drill on this particular scenario for a while just because it's a new scenario. How do we make sure we check rooftops? I mean, I've been in a unit that was hunted by a sniper. We for sure pre-looked at every potential sniper point. And we all did this anti-sniper motion weave thing that we all had. I'm kind of making it up right now like that. You did that when you stood still. You had all this counter sniper stuff. So there's all of these things that can be added in, but all of that takes time, and you have to allow that system to look at itself and say, here's where the problem is. And they will do that. There will be reports, and it should all be public record at some point.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And there, when I say we give the folks time, that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be investigations, and that mistakes may very well be uncovered, human errors that happens. Right. What I try to steer clear of is the vast conspiracies that, looking from the outside or from the inside out for so many years, very few agencies get along well enough with any other agencies or with each other to plan and let alone execute a very well-timed conspiracy. That's what books are made of, and there are some. Now, I don't discount that they don't happen, or that they happen, but boy, they're rare, and certainly one that from what I've seen here, it's we'll see what comes out of the investigation.
Yeah. And sometimes it's something as dumb as a fritzy earpiece. You're like, what? I can't, what? I can't, what? And then you run back to get a new battery for it, because these things happen. It's a hot, humid day, and the thing just goes blinky, and you got to go swap it out. I mean, that happens all the time.
I nearly ripped my ear off I had a hard silicone earpiece made, a custom made one. And the people that did it all the time were getting soft silicone earpieces made, but this was back in 91, and hard silicone was the way, that hard plastic. And we had those humongous, I'm sure you remember them, the humongous Motorola radios that looked like and weighed about the same much as a brick. In fact, we called them a brick. And they clipped on our belts, and I was the advance agent I was assigned to the State Department at the time. And so I was with NYPD Highway. They're the ones that do dignitary escorts and stuff like that. And I was with NYPD Highway in their patrol car, and we were taking the foreign minister of Japan somewhere in upstate New York to play golf. I can't remember where. And so our vehicle gets there first. I'm supposed to jump out, link up with the advanced person that's already there, and we get the limo situated. Well, I jumped out of the car. My radio had fallen off of my belt and was in the back seat of the car. It very nearly bulldogged me to the ground, just that sudden weight when it pulled on my ear. It was only a split second that I was out of coma, Yerk janked it out of my ear, but little things like that at precisely the right time or wrong time. It's the same mistakes, or the same little human movements, like moving your head just at the right time so you get smacked in the ear instead of in the head. So yeah, there's a lot of things that need to be explained, and some things that's the way it is.
Here's another one of those stories. This legitimately happened. So the person who carries the football, this is the thing with all the nuclear codes in it, everybody. That person is met up with the boss, and the boss is like, "Hey, get over here, come and talk to me." And he's talking to him, and the football currently is under his bed or something like that in a hotel room. And the president just kind of keeps him, and then they hop in the car, and he's like, because the boss is talking to him, and he's like, "I'm not going to tell him that the football's back in my hotel room, but now I have to deal with the problem that the football's back in the hotel room. It's all going to be fine." But that's not, like these things happen, so the boss grabs you, the boss wants your attention, the boss gets your attention, and you deal with these other things later on. And so someone races back to get, but that is the chaos of a moving show of security. And it's very challenging gosh, I don't know how much surveillance you've done, but you talk about a crazy, chaotic thing. It's easy to lose somebody. I did surveillance one time. We pulled over, and there were two of the same car. And we came over a rise, and I was like, "Oh, there's two of them. Which one do we pick?" 50-50. No one knows because we're the car. We're the only one that has eyes on it and realized there's two. And so we picked the wrong one, And
it happens all the time. And there's that screwy, just fate, whatever. We had an armed robbery in a little town in North Texas where I used to work as a police officer. Armed robbery over in Fort Worth, supposedly coming our way. And it was, the perpetrators were supposedly in an orange Volkswagen. How many orange Volkswagens do you see? We had three in our small town. Three orange Volkswagens or come through our small town while everybody's looking for it. It was kind of like that. What is that? The Thomas Crown affair, where everybody's got an umbrella, and it's just we were lost. They were lost in the shuffle. We ended up getting the people, but but things like that, you can't write them in a story because it's too pat. It's too God is a machine. There has to be, like, you could have your bad guy or your good guy have all kinds of bad stuff happen to him, but if you add too much, it doesn't seem real. Truth is, it's much easier to write. Truth sometimes reads like fiction if you try to be too true about how screwy things can get.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you're doing surveillance and someone dives into a gas and go, a Wawa or whatever, right? Someone from that surveillance detail is going to park at that Wawa, and they're now going to look for a dead drop for however long it takes until they think that person's out of the detail, basically for the rest of the day. And then that's a whole sub report. And so that person has to be absolutely thorough. And if they find something, then they go like, "I found these things," and then they're buying like packs of Twinkies, and because they don't know what they're looking for. It's ridiculous. Right. And if you add too much stuff like that into a story, I can see how all of a sudden it's like, what are we talking about Twinkies in the Wawa for? Like, it gets nuts.
Right. You have to pare it down, just the facts.
How much chaos can you put into a story, though? Like, you're riding your motorcycle on the Alaska highway. Some weird things happen. Bolts seize up, tendons snap, whatever. How much of that can you put in?
That's the dance. And I think a fight is a good example. Fighting my Jujitsu instructor for years is a very dear friend of mine. He's a 10th degree in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, not Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And we have long discussions about fighting, and fighting, as I've learned over the years, conflict is the same. It's communication. It's the same thing as dialogue. It's just violent dialogue. And so the same with dialogue or a fight scene, a violent conflict scene, you want to put in bits and pieces that guide the reader through, but you can't put in everything. If you put in everything, it becomes either a kind of a boring how-to video, or you get lost in the minutia, where the foot drops, so what you want to do is give a suggestion, just like with dialogue. If I put in too much dialogue, and almost every writer I know anyway, starts off with a draft that's too heavy on, too much dialogue or too much exposition or whatever. Right. So my wife's a retired English teacher, history teacher. And so she'll read my stuff, and if I get too much, she always gives me the same little bon mot. She says, "Do you like my hat?" "Yes, I like your hat." "Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye." The Dr. Seuss we don't talk like that in real life. And you certainly don't talk like that in a book. You don't have to give all the hello, how are you? I'm fine, she said.
Right.
How was your day? Get to the meat of the matter. And the same with a fight. So you really have to, you want to give the reader an impression that you wrote a lot more than you really did. I think that's the key.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We're talking about Bad River, Mark's latest book. The link is right below. The links are working a little bit funny on the website. So if you just look in the show description, you'll find the link in there. You know what I always say, buy two and buddy read it. But if you like thrillers, action, adventure, that kind of thing, Alaska, all kinds of stuff, it's all in there right there. Yeah, the thing with chaos, like Clancy, you've written for the Clancy franchise, is like, and then there was a redwood tree floating in the ocean, and you're like, wait, what's going on with that? And it would just every now and then he'd pan back to that tree, and you're like, that's gonna be something later on. And he was great at seeding the chaos, right? And you're like, that's gonna be something. And it would take him 200 pages to get there, but boy, he would get there.
I can't. I think it was Some of All Fears. He had. I can't remember, Some of All Fears or Rainbow Six, where he spent a chapter talking about a fuel tank of a Toyota being made and how, and eventually that car blew up. And you know, as a Clancy reader, okay, this fuel tank's going to be important sooner or later.
Yep. And that does go to that chaos, that friction that happens in these combat like situations. You know, I got to run back to my room. This really happens. I got to go grab my stuff because I got a chance to go on patrol. And I reach in to grab my door handle to grab my shit. Door handle comes off in my hand, and the door just will not come open in a timely fashion. You know, and I have to decide what to do because my stuff is behind a locked door. The door won't unlock. It won't open. And the patrol is just not going to wait for me. So I had to figure it out. You know, I figured it out, but then you come back and you're like, I am exhausted. Oh, that's right. I've got to get this door off of this. You know, the whole thing. These things really happen.
Happen a lot. They happen an awful lot. I was on a protective detail again with the State Department. At this point, it was the foreign minister of Egypt, and that was the same year that there was an assassination attempt on Mubarak, and the head of their detail, kind of the equivalent of our RSO or regional security officer, but in the United States, he had in Egypt, or the Egyptian had gone to a strip club and gotten their limo placard, which is what gets you in and out of UN grounds, stolen. And so we were on higher op tempo, especially during the day. Well, at night, it was me and two brand new DS agents that were just outside the room. We were just there all night. One of us was standing post, and I was a pretty young deputy at the time, just standing post, sitting post really, outside the hotel room door, while the other two rotated, you know, resting periods and answering the phone in the hotel room down the hall. And we had cameras up so we could see the door, they could see the person standing or sitting post. And the alcove of the elevators is right where you could hear the elevators, you could see the alcove, but you couldn't see the elevators themselves. And it was so we were on this higher threat tempo, and I heard the elevator door open, and then nobody got off the elevator. Still nobody got off the elevator, and the elevator door stayed open. And so I had my sidearm out, and first I was like waving in front of the cameras, like I tried to hit my radio, nothing. I didn't want to talk, waving in front of the cameras, getting the guys to come out, Nobody came out. And I went around the corner and I hear this, and I thought, oh my gosh, they're deploying some kind of gas or something. Well, it was the cleaning guy had stopped the elevators on that floor and was cleaning all the brass around the door. And he was just riding up every floor, cleaning the brass of the elevators.
Right.
And I went back, and both of the DS agents had conked out. They'd fallen asleep. We were working long hours. They weren't on like I was, so they had taken the chance to. They weren't supposed to, but we had a very, very. I wasn't that junior, and we had a very tense prayer meeting, so to speak, them and me about being my backup. But stuff happens. That's just human. No plan survives first contact with the enemy, or everybody's got a plan till you get punched in the beak. All those things are so true.
Yeah, and just to continue to play with this thing, that could be the trigger. That could be the test. Does someone respond to that?
Sure.
And if so, hey, this is the cover for status. No, I'm just cleaning these elevators, and so you don't know. And when you are on these things where you're walking through a place that's dangerous, or whatever it is, you can't be so switched on that you're always switched on, but you also have to be switched on enough to be responsive to the things that happened. And I guess I would ask you is, you can't just train and demo and everything else. Most of the time, you have to just go do your job. And so as much as you want to have training and specialize, that's for people who don't deploy very much, like, yeah, I've got all these badges and certificates, at least in my world. And you're like, yeah, but you never went anywhere and did anything with them, like compared to the people that just went out and worked and worked and worked and worked. So there is that balance. And again, this goes back to the events in the past weekend with former President Trump being almost assassinated. A lot of these folks, this will be the only time anything like this ever happens to them. And they'll become experts, whether they are or not, who knows? But the event is so outsized, it just takes over your career a lot of times, where one thing can define you and you're wholly unprepared, not through anybody's fault, but just because you can't prepare for a free radical like this.
No, you're right. And especially in protection, and where, and I did a fair amount of protection, but most of what I did was not protection like the Secret Service does. And, we did Supreme Court justices, or we did in the event of a threat but I would never call myself an expert to the level that a highly trained Secret Service agent is. But I do know the wheres and wherefores, and have done a fair amount of it. But there's really no way to train other than, I shouldn't say that. There are ways to train for attacks on the principal. There are ways to train for getting your adrenaline up and, that sort of thing. But until an event, whether it's somebody, the actual assassination, there's only so far training could take you. My first partner in the Marshal service, and I had 7 years in law enforcement before I came on the Marshal service. I've been a detective and a mounted police officer and patrol and all that. My first partner kind of took me aside, and we were up by the Oklahoma border, and we handled all the counties from about, I don't know, the top part of Texas down to Beaumont, so Eastern District of Texas. So we had a lot of backwoods and piney woods and a lot of outlaws to chase down, a lot of fugitive work. It was great work. But he was former highway patrol, Texas Highway Patrol, and he sat me down and he said, "Now, Mark, I've come to realize that in this line of work, there are people that will and people that won't. And I need to know that you're one that will." And then I was left to figure out, what's he exactly is he talking about? Is he talking about backing me up? Is he talking about, will I shoot somebody if the time comes? If what? But there's really no way to know. You can think, you can hope, you can pray, you can train, but until the time comes and you really feel that, okay, this is the real deal. It's just, there's some people, and I've seen people that you would not think, you would think, oh man, they're kind of a shy wallflower, shrinking violet type, just rise to the occasion and kick ass. And then other people that you'd think, man, they're stout in the gym, completely freak out when something as simple as a horse collar life vest inflates around their neck in the pool during training, and they try to drown everyone around them. So and they could be the best shot, they could be tactically, you see what I mean? So until the real thing happens, because of that, I don't look at video of Secret Service during this time and go, well, they should have done that. I can think it, and I do think things, but I'm really kind of waiting. And
then there's also just the default that I think you'll probably have as well as I do. Like, hey, the person in the field gets the benefit of the doubt because you don't know what they were briefed that day. You don't know anything. And by the way, if you're looking at this thing from the assassin's point of view, they're creeping up who knows if they're like, I'm gonna die doing this no matter what. But they creep up and they creep up and they creep up, and they're like, I can't believe so nobody's said nor done anything yet. They kind of get there.
Yeah.
It's 90 something degrees. It's gonna be super hot, and just their heart has got to be beating out of his chest, and
Yeah.
just to
Like I
even
say,
get
there needs to be some things explained. Don't misunderstand me.
yeah.
I believe some things need to be
No,
explained.
yeah,
There's
yeah. I guess
but
I would say there's a lot of variables in the entire
absolutely.
event, right? Like
Absolutely.
when I take my friends shooting, it's easy to stand and go "Ba-king" and hit a target. But like if you go do like 20 push-ups first to get your heart beating and try to shoot at that same target, boy, it gets a lot harder
Right.
because your heart is beating. And so there's just a lot of variables. And to the people in the field, until we know something else, it's just you have to kind of, there they
Oh
are,
yeah.
as prepared as they can be at
Mhm.
that moment, because that's where they are, and then they act. And like you said, biggest, toughest dude, smallest, tiny. I saw when people say women, aren't good in combat, I saw this, not even an E4, standing up in a up armored Humvee with a cigarette hanging from her mouth, and it was time to rack that 50 cal, that Ma Deuce. Just she had no
Mhm.
problem doing that, and I guarantee if you would have got in front of her, she would have, and she needed to, she would have squeezed that butterfly trigger, and she would have rock and rolled with that thing. She was fine.
Oh
And
yeah.
then the next
Yeah.
person is literally the next person I saw in a turret was another E4, and he was a dude, and he was as timid as you could be with that big old nasty gun. And I was like, what a difference, between the
Oh yeah.
attitude of the two people.
Oh yeah. There are certainly jobs that require bulk and strength and
Yeah.
mass, but then so much of it has to do with heart and
Yeah.
like you said, that real those things that are going on, the what I try in my writing, whether it's writing a Clancy and surveillance detection routes
Right.
I try to take things that I've done, what motorcycle riding for the Jerichos, foot pursuits in the cutters. They're generally about Alaska. They're about fugitive hunting. They're about the cold. They're about the
Yeah.
problems with moose and bears. And you not only have to worry about the bad guys trying to
Yeah.
kill you, but you have to worry about a moose stomping you to pudding because you're between her and her baby. So, and those are things that I've dealt with in real
Yeah.
life, and little things that you might not think of if you're just reading a book or watching a movie or imagining something. You don't think, like, there's been several videos online, and actually one of my, I don't know him, but my son knows him, and other officers I know that know him well. There's a officer here in Anchorage that shot through his window at a guy that was shooting at him. Well, unless oh wow, that is really cool tactically, and it was. He needed to do it, but you don't. But I want to write about what's going on with his hearing now. If he gets out
Oh,
of the car after
yeah.
shooting and has to give that guy commands, or somebody's yelling at him. I think Black Hawk Down actually did a good job of that, where they're
Mm,
shooting over the guy's ear, and he can't even, you can't hear someone right next to you when you've been in a confined space. Um,
yeah.
those sorts of little things, the smell, or the way, even if you don't have rounds go off next to your head, when situations get tense, you get tunnel vision, you get your hearing, you become about survival, and a
Yeah.
lot of your senses get dampened because they're all focused on your survival. And sometimes it's to our detriment. We
Yeah.
tune out critical things, and that's one thing that training can really help you in, because
Yeah.
your gross motor skills, you retain some fine motor skills a little longer if you've trained in that
Right.
more and more and more. And like you said,
Yeah.
cardio, if you can even do 20 push-ups, then if you can do 100, then doing the 20 is not as taxing on your body,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
when you're an old tactical Santa like me, and looks like you as well.
Oh
So
yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I'm over here cracking my rebuilt ankle,
there
trying
you
to
go.
get it to cooperate. But yeah, so much of what you said is just on the money. The different techniques and the procedures and the things that we try to have, at least in our database, in case you need to use it. But one day was some SEALs bounced rounds off of the hood of the car to get it to go in, because you don't necessarily have to hit the person. You just want to make it so that they can't see, so they don't want to drive, so that, and they're just like, and if you get them, great. But if you shoot straight in, it's just not as dangerous. And so we're like, all right, we'll try that. And so we learned how to like skip the bullets. And that sounds ridiculous, but I'll be damned. It's, with smaller rounds, you can kind of do that if you have practice that, or at least know that it's a technique. Have I ever used that? No. Am I going to need to? No, because if I get into a gunfight, I'm not doing my job. My weapon's right here. I've got to talk and think, and so that whole thing. When you do get these, look, you're going to all these different locations. Obviously, Texas. You've traveled around with your regular job and everything else, but do you actually go to these locations so you can talk about? And like you mentioned, a federal prison in here, right? And granted, it's in Texas, but you have to actually know what that prison looks like to know that there's not a fence line and it's just paint. And I'm not giving anything away here in the book, but like to know these details, I think it adds a lot. I mean, it's one thing to know the tactics, techniques, procedures, the warrants, and all that stuff, but to know the physicality of a place is a whole different and time-consuming, expensive thing if you're writing a book.
Yeah, a lot of times I'll use an experience that I've had from one prison, for instance, to describe the ink, because they're going to be generally the same. There's certain things like a lot of times research is to make sure you don't write what you don't know. People always say write what you know, but the real key, I think, is not to write what you don't know. And so, for instance, the state prison in Walla Walla, Washington, I don't know if they're still like this, so I wouldn't write it without checking it. But when I was going back and forth, when I was stationed in North Idaho, and we would take prisoners, federal prisoners, and have to return them on writs back to state custody, or to go get someone out of state custody to stand trial on a federal crime. The federal prison in Walla Walla, when we would drive in our Marshal Service Suburban or sedan or whatever, I think I had a Suburban back then, we have rifle, shotgun, we wore hats and badges around our necks. And when you drive in, you drive through one gate, and then there's a tower, and the tower guys, so you're in this sally port, the tower guys lower down these canvas buckets. They look like 5-gallon paint buckets, but they're soft-sided, and they lower them down on a rope, and one of them's, one of them's on the gun, one of them's on the rope, and you put all your weapons inside those buckets, and they bring it back up, and then you pull forward, and then somebody on the ground looks under your car. They do all the things that normal prisons do. And other ones, you drive in, you get out, put them in a locker. So to me, I remember that very well in Walla Walla, because at that time I was carrying a Smith & Wesson 44 Special with a round butt, a 3-inch barrel, and I had ivory grips on it with a Marshal Service badge inlaid into the side. And then I also had a secondary weapon, and I had 2 knives. And my partner was carrying a 45, because he was a SOGger, a special operations group that was all tricked out, and a small revolver. And he carried like a push dagger. And I just remember looking up when those guys got the bucket up, and they were just in awe of these cool martially weapons we had. And they were like looking them over. Where other places, the troops never see it. You just lock it up. So when I write about Walla Walla, they got a bucket. And I don't go into that much detail, but it's enough detail that when somebody that's been to Walla Walla, they go, oh, he's been to Walla Walla. So I just try to put in, and sometimes I say this all the time when people ask me about research, but I go to a place, one of the Clancy's I wrote about Argentina. I went to Argentina and to Buenos Aires with an idea of, here's what I want to find. When I got there, I found a whole bunch of unknown unknowns that helped populate the book. With Bad River, my wife and I did much of Bad River, or some of Bad River. The climax of Bad River happens on the Kobuk River in far north Alaska. And up in the Kobuk, it's Inupiaq country. It's the place where when you see a picture of Alaska with a bunch of caribou swimming across the river, and native folks in their boats, and they're harvesting them out of the river, that's the Kobuk River. There's sand dunes up there. There's chunks of jade just laying in the tundra. It's just a amazing place. It's like going to another planet. It's so unique. So I've been there. My wife and I did a series of visits to the schools along the Kobuk River to teach literacy to the schools along there. So the whole time I was there, and that was 4 years ago before I ever wrote this, but I'm able to draw from that for this.
Yeah. And is that by design that you're like, hey, let's go do these things, and while I'm there, I'm going to break out the camera and the notebook and do some of this work? Or is this something you just hold in your brain and go, I'll remember this? How do you hold that?
Yeah, sometimes, sometimes I go to a place and I'm going there to research a book that I'm working on. Like the last Tom Clancy that I wrote last year, Command and Control, my wife and I took a cruise through the Panama Canal, thinking, because we were going to spend some time in Colombia, thinking that I was going to set most of the book in Colombia. When we went through the canal, I did some tours, and then as soon as we got off the cruise, we came home to Alaska. I booked a flight, flew back down to Panama, because that's where I wanted to set the bulk of the book. So I spent some time researching there. So I went there for that reason. But the in the Arliss Cutter series that Bad River's a part of, when I first moved to Alaska, I was part of a tactical tracking unit, also run by my Jujitsu teacher and good friend Ty Cunningham. He was the commander of the unit, and he was getting this unit set up about tracking. And just so happened that he was out of district on another assignment, and a guy in a little island down close to Ketchikan, allegedly, I think he's been already convicted, but it was 25 years ago. He was suspected of chopping another man's head off with a splitting maul during an argument, a drunken argument. And so he chopped this guy's head off with a splitting maul and then fled into the woods. So they couldn't find him. So the troopers and the local police down there on this island called us, and we flew down as a tracking unit. It was me and a couple of guys from our fugitive, actually Anchorage police officers, and another trooper. They were part of our fugitive unit. So I was down there as a tracker. I'd never been to Prince of Wales Island before. It was, again, like another planet, like being dropped into the pages of a National Geographic. Huge old growth forest, deer everywhere, totem poles. This is Tlingit and Haida country, so the totem pole builders. So it just such a unique culture and such unique geography. And of course, maritime. It's an island surrounded by these beautiful, pristine Alaska waters on the Inside Passage. And we flew in to a town called Klawak. We spent 3 days tracking this guy. Ended up finding him on a little island called Fish Egg Island. We had tracked him. He was wearing extra tough boots, which that's like, everybody in Southeast Alaska wear. We call them Juno sneakers. So the tracks were very hard to ID. Anyway, we ended up finding him on this little island. He had nothing but a pair of sweats on. He was about to freeze to death. It was not winter, but the water's cold, and he had swam across to Fish Egg Island. And he told me as we were bringing him back in the boat, and I think I have some pictures somewhere on my social media if people scroll back far enough, but he told me, he said, I've been waiting for you guys to find me. He said, you came by me several times, but I turned myself into a rock, and so you were not able to see me. And so all that whole thing was interesting to me. At the end of the day, now I was writing at the time, I was writing Westerns at the time. I keep a little series of notebooks. My kids call them my book of all books. They're little Moleskine notebooks. I've got dozens of them. I wrote, I'm going to set a book on Prince of Wales Island someday. This is just such a mysterious place, these dark, dark forests. But it took me until the first Arliss Cutter book to actually go back and set a book on Prince of Wales. And at that point, I went back, drilled down. So a lot of the Alaska places I've been, whether it was hunting a fugitive or seizing a boat, or right after I got here, I was sent out to seize 30,000 pounds of frozen pollock that were in a freezer container. I had to board a Chinese vessel back early on that we were impounding for non-payment, and I think some EPA violations. And then, so when it came time to write, I think Cold Snap 2 books ago, I start that with Arliss and his partner Lola boarding the Russian vessel. So I just, you know, I try to write about things that I've at least done in part. A lot of the fight scenes that I've been in have been fights that have been altercations that myself or a friend or
Mm,
my sons or somebody have been, involved in, that I've made way more grandiose because, I mean, I've studied jujitsu for decades now and other martial arts as well, but I can count on one hand the real fights I've been in, as
right.
you know, and
Yeah.
any honest law enforcement officer will tell you that you might get in a lot of struggles, but 99 times out of 100 or more, the person's just trying to get away and you're in their way. They're not really fighting you, they're struggling with you to try to escape. And a lot of times you'll end up with a ripped shirt or a jacket or
Yeah.
whatever. But there are those times when that person turns around and says, I'm going to kick your tail and we're
Mm,
going to the ground now. Those are generally
yeah.
the things that I like to write about because they're way more intense. So
Yeah.
I've probably written 100 fight scenes, all sort of based on the 3 or 4 real ones that I've been in.
Yeah, yeah, and again, like my job, shoot, if I'm getting into a fight, because I'm all about building trust, right? And so
Sure.
I think about like how do I avoid all that stuff and be protected by the sheiks and the warlords. I want the warlord to be like, Pete, you're my best friend. Come over here and talk to me and
Yeah.
help me out, you know. And so,
Yep.
yeah, if I'm look, I'll jam my thumb to the back of someone's eye socket, you know, to get the hell out of there. but I'm not be able to come back to their house though, you know. It's I sort of have to like do approach these things differently. But that's one of the cool things about your world of storytelling is you have all these different tools you can do. And in the Clancy world, you can have a Rainbow Six guy come down and have all the high end SEAL type, you know, Delta type skills.
Mhm.
But you also can bring in this other person who's, you know, a wizard with tech and solve a problem in different ways. It's really neat that you're able to play in all these platforms and you know just explore like that. I mean, I'll put the link up to the first Arliss Cutter book here in a second for anybody who wants to read that. Which world is I don't know, like how would you compare and contrast? I don't want to say harder, which one's more work, but when you are allowed to play in the Clancy world, you've got this different responsibility, different rules, different universe. Which one? How would you compare the two?
Oh, that's a good question. As far as it was a great honor to write the Clancy's. It was when Mark Graney wrote 7. He wrote a couple while Clancy was still alive, and then 5 more, so 7 total. And then, unbeknownst to me, he had recommended me to Tom Colgan with Putnam, who edits the Clancy's. And so the call to write the Clancy's was completely out of the blue. And of course, it was a great honor. It was terrifying because I was a Clancy fan and just I read The Hunt for Red October when it came out when I was a rookie.
Yeah,
I was in the police academy when it came out in '84, and so I grew up in law enforcement reading Clancy's. And so to find out that I was going to get to write about John Clark, who's my all-time favorite action hero, and
yeah,
Jack Ryan, who's my all-time favorite just good person, and what I try to be as a servant leader, then man, what an honor. At the same
yeah,
time, so I called Mark, just effusively thanking him for putting my name forward, and he kind of chuckled and he was like, yeah, well, we'll see if you thank me in another year or two. And he was absolutely right. It was my
yeah.
wife always, she jokes that when so the books were always due in July, 1st of August timeframe. And the end of June, she said that I started getting the Jack Ryan flu. It's just you're worried that am I getting this right? Am I getting that right? Am I, so after 6, I decided I need to just focus on my own stuff now. This has been a great ride, but then I ended up doing one more, um, and I'm glad I did. But I stepped away like Mark did. There just comes a time when you just want
Yeah.
to focus on your own characters because you feel like I've milked as much as I can milk out of these guys, that I've grown up just loving these
Yeah,
characters.
yeah,
How much of a plot, because you write about North Korea, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Russia, China. And I ended up, one of mine, my favorite of all my Clancy's is a book called Red Winter, which is a throwback to 1985 in East Germany. So you get to see Jack Ryan and Mary Pat Foley when they were young and just getting to know one another, and John Clark. So it was great fun, but the world of fugitive hunting, the world of Alaska, or even the Jericho Quinns, which I'll be writing another Jericho Quinn before long. I know those worlds. I've lived with those worlds. Those are my characters. I know those characters. And if I want to take them in a different direction, I'm not constrained. Because there's some things that you just don't do with a Clancy character. They're
yeah.
his. And so I would never presume to do that. But so I wouldn't say that any book is easier, because every book ought to have
Sure.
you really ought to try to give the readers the best story you can. And I like to hope anyway that the writing style is generally the same through all the books, because Tom Colgan, the editor of the Clancy's, told me early on when I was, all angsty and worried, he said, don't try to be Tom Clancy. Write the best Marc Cameron book you can in the spirit of Tom Clancy. And so every book that I write, I'm nervous about turning it in, because it's going to go out to the world, and there's plenty of keyboard warriors out there. They're going to find some sort of fault with it, and that's their business. I can't.
Yeah.
I like that. I want people to give me Amazon reviews or other reviews. I don't read mine because I don't see any good. It's kind of like knowing your own IQ. You either get kind of caught up because you're so smart, or sad because you're dumb. And I don't.
Right.
It doesn't do me any good to know. Basically, by the time a book comes out, I'm already done with this book after that and into the next book, and somebody can point out, oh, you made this mistake on this word on page 75. Okay, all right, I'm sorry, I'm a human being, or I'm it made it past all our people. It doesn't do me any good. So I want people to give me reviews. That's great, and I want people to enjoy the books, but it's too much pressure, and maybe I'm just too timid and sad and neurotic to read a bunch of reviews.
No, I think it's a healthy way to look at it. Like you said, like, oh, your IQ is a $104. Exactly what I thought. Whatever it says. And it's like when I have a bad show, technical, maybe I don't do a perfect job hosting. I can and I do listen to a lot of my episodes just to make sure that I'm doing the things that I think I need to be doing, but I don't get too critical. And when someone else is critical of me within it, if there's something there that maybe I needed to do, okay, fair. But I don't spend any time obsessing about it, because the next thing's ahead of me, and the next thing, and the next thing. And so, I think it makes a lot of sense. Plus, and when people, they love, on social media, who don't know me, they'll insult me by saying, oh, this is another guy at the podcast. And it's like, look, if you think that that's an insult to me, you ought to hear what the guy in the mirror says to me. I'm like, that guy is always going to be nastier to me than you ever can. So with your adorable little podcast thing, we're talking about Mark's book, Bad River. Yeah. I wanted to say this one thing, get your thoughts on this, and if you want to brush it aside, we can. But one of the things that, as I was reading my Tom Clancy books, this is in the 90s and everything, I noticed that his dialogue aged away from me, and I started to lose contact with the books, because he was losing me and look, I'm a counterintelligence agent at the time, and I'm like, it's Navy, but some of this writing, it's like you're writing like an old man. And this isn't how my peers talk. And so maybe I was too close to the heartbeat of what it was like to be in that business. But were you cognizant of that at all? Did you get a feel for that? Did anybody else? Because I've talked to other people that have written, and they've said, like, I wanted to bring it and make it a little younger. I'm not trying to load your answer, but Did you sense that when you wrote that? Did you do anything to update things?
You know, yes, and so Don Bentley, who wrote several of the Jack Ryan Jr. novels for the Clancy estate, he and I were having a discussion about this right after he came on. So Mike Madden was writing the juniors when I first started, the Jack Ryan seniors, and then Don took over from Mike. I don't remember how many through 3 or 4 in. Anyway, Don's a great writer, and he's writing the Vince Flynn books now, but and a very careful writer. And so we had a lot of philosophy discussions just like this. And I told him, I remember telling him my philosophy was, our job is not to write like Tom Clancy. We need to make readers feel like they're reading a Tom Clancy book. Like you and I felt when we were reading the first books. We want modern readers to have that same feeling. In order to do that, we can't write the same book. Readers require much more fast-paced action now. We still have to put in the technical things to make it a Clancy. The Clancy books are far more technical than my Jericho Quinn books. And the Jericho Quinn books are more in line with Clancy as far as world, you know, terrorism and geopolitical thrillers and things, where the Arliss Cutters are based in Alaska. I don't want to say police procedurals, but kind of with Marshal Service and fugitives, and more like Westerns, really. They're cowboy books with set in Alaska, you know. Even Stone Cross has a dog sled scene in it. But the Clancy's are all books. You have to keep up with the time. So, for instance, in the Cutters, I spend a lot of time standing around a fire pit in the winter, or chatting with my SWAT, going to SWAT training weeks with my son when he was on SWAT, and now his buddies, that is when he's moved away from Alaska to get work other places. I listen to their war stories. I listen to the people that are doing the job talk, and even to the point of in the book that I'm working on now, that has, it might actually be in Bad River. I can't remember, but I think it is in Bad River. I mentioned the internal Marshal Service database, or what, where we track fugitives and collateral leads and things like that. Now I think it's called Capture. We didn't have that when I was in. Now, your run-of-the-mill reader will not know that the new one's called Capture. When I did it, it was called, for a time, it was called Want, then it was called PTS, which is not near as cool as Capture. All these different databases. So, but I want, if a deputy marshal reads it, I want him to know, oh, he knows this. He really was a deputy,
paying attention. Yeah.
So the same thing with, for instance, the first books that I read as an 8-year-old boy were Hardy Boys books. I still have those original Hardy Boys books with the kind of dusky brown cover. In those books, Frank and Joe Hardy call each other chums, and we're having a gay old time. And they use words that mean different things, or we don't even use anymore. So when you read a new Hardy Boys book, they don't speak the same way. And I think as writers, even rewrites of the same books. So as writers, we have to write a little bit differently. We have to write with, if I'm writing about a teenage kid, and that teenager is saying gnarly and excellent all the time, then the normal kids, the kids from today, are going to go, what are you're writing my parents? You're not writing me. I don't talk that way anymore. I mean, I was writing something, and my youngest son was reading, and he goes, yeah, and you could, or actually I wasn't writing, I was talking to him about a plot. And he goes, yeah, and this guy could come in and he could be clutch. He'd be the clutch guy in that situation. And I'd never heard that term before. I don't.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So
yeah,
I think
totally.
we do have to. When we first started talking, I said that we're the mollusks of the world. We're really filtering out, and if we're not honest with ourselves, and if we keep, I mean, if I used my vernacular, I'd say fixin', because I'm from Texas and I'm fixing to go do this. and I would
Yeah.
speak more like a cowboy, even though I don't have quite as much of an accent as I used to. But my characters can't all talk like me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. And I appreciate you taking time to explain that, because it was one of the things that it's just fascinating as we look at someone as great as Clancy can show his age and can be evolved. And one of the things I admire about the Clancy world now is that they have taken all these different fantastic authors. Jerome Preisler, we didn't mention him. He's written for the Clancy books, and just all these great people that give us more of this stuff. And then how much the entire marketplace has blossomed. You know, we mentioned Andrews and Wilson. We haven't mentioned Jack Carr yet, you know, and all these incredible authors who've actually done the job. I mean, how great is it to have a Navy SEAL writing about, you know, military thrillers? I mean,
Oh yeah,
it's
Jackson.
incredible, you know?
Jack
Yeah.
Jack knows his stuff. We've got a lot of folks that have really done the job, that are putting out some good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Well, just everybody, if you want to read a great book, and I've been enjoying it as I've gone through it. I don't remember if Capture was in here or not yet. Maybe I haven't gotten to that part of the book, or maybe I just didn't notice. But it's called Bad River. It's by Marc Cameron. And like I always say, buddy read, so buy two, get one for a friend. And the link for it, I'll put up again here on the page. It is right there. So look down below, and that's what you do. And if you want to get anything from these guys, that's how you do it. You just go to Amazon and click on that, or just go to Mark's website. It's real simple. You type in his name and you'll find him and get the books there. Anything in closing before we go? You want to ask me any questions? Anything else you want to cover?
No, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I like to keep in touch with readers, and so linking up with me via social media, or I'm actually horrible at social media, except right when a book comes out. But I am generally available. Well, I have to be. I get yelled at by my publisher if I'm not. But so when you look at my social media page, it's generally stuff about my wife and I doing fun stuff in the South Pacific or Alaska, or places that are, you know, the Arliss's partner is a Lola Tariki, which is a Cook Island Maori young lady deputy. So I just enjoy people, and that's what I like to write about. And so I like chatting with readers and communicating with readers. So if you like the book, let me know.
All right, stand by. I'll be right back to you. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.